Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. We're glad you decided to check us out. God has a specific message of hope for your life and mine today. So listen up.
Storms come. They threaten us, scare us, and they damage us. Sometimes the storms come in different forms, but they carry the same characteristics. How do you deal with the waves of trouble that keep coming? How do you become unshakable?
You know, the truth is we are in the middle of an amazing storm in our country. I mean, I don't know if you realize it or not. When we were planning this series out, Bruce and Steve and I were meeting back in July and planning out the calendar for the next year. We had no idea of what was about to come because, when really we had no idea in July that August would actually bring a very huge disaster in Houston in the form of Hurricane Harvey that would hit. And we would be sending disaster relief. Southern Baptist Convention, we have disaster relief that's in, Scott over here it serves in disaster relief for the Southern Baptist Convention. These happen in churches all over the place and all around. And, and we sent, the disaster relief people were sending over there to help Houston. And, and you had the Army and all these, all the, what was it, the Redneck Army, not the Redneck Army, but what was it from Cajun Navy. That's what it was, the Cajun Navy. Okay, I got it. It took me a little bit, but I got there. The Cajun Navy was going to help. And then before we could get done with Houston, we were jerking disaster relief back to another location because in September, here comes Irma, powering through, the Caribbean and right up, through Florida and devastating places in, on the west coast of Florida and throughout the middle and causing all kind of damage here, tornadoes here, all kinds of things. And so we're jerking resources back over here. But before that was even done, right after that, it's followed by one of the largest earthquakes recorded in Mexico. I actually heard that the earthquake actually launched a small tsunami off the coast of Mexico. So you've got all this going on, and then on top of that, in the middle of time, we didn't really realize this as much, but this has been one of the largest wildfire seasons our country has ever had on record. You have just massive amounts of lands that are being burned in Idaho and Montana and Oregon and California and Washington, Colorado, all those areas. In Montana alone, there were over 400,000 acres burned. And they're trying to deal with all of that up there at the same time that all of this is going on. And then if the Caribbean hadn't had enough with Irma, here comes Jose. Here comes, and to finish it off, here comes Maria right up behind it and just devastates, Puerto Rico and so many of the places down there. And we're dealing with disasters there. We're trying to now pull everything and go, how do we go down and help there? And I appreciate Alberto so much. He's gotten some information I put up on our Facebook page this last week. He actually has a personal friend that runs a nursing home in Puerto Rico. One of the hardest things, I don't know if you know, but in trying to find out where we can help is to find someone who actually has a way to get down there and a system to distribute it. That's been the hardest thing over the past week and a half. And so what's been great about Alberto's situation is he knows somebody, so he can mail it and send it to him. And if you would like to help, I know he sent some this last week. If we could send more, if you would be willing to help, check with him. The list of what they need, is on his Facebook page. It's been shared on ours. You can check with him right here. He's the guitarist that's right over here in the Bay West shirt. There's Alberto. So, to do that, and we could send more. Otherwise, I put some other resources on our Facebook page that you can send with. But even in the midst of all of that, here comes Las Vegas. And for some reason, a guy who has a lot of money and all the time in the world, no real great disadvantage that we know of. He's got a girlfriend. She might have left him. He's got a family that seemed relatively normal. He just decides to go and rent out a suite and take a bunch of ammunition and guns and totally blow in the profile and just decides to shoot 500 people and kill about 59, I think was the last count. 500 and something shot. Why in the world? And no one understands it because it's not, it can't make sense of the profile that normally you find with people who do mass shootings. This guy doesn't fit it. As if you could make sense of senseless violence. You really could. I mean, the thing, as if anybody could. And it's amazing because everybody's got an answer. Everybody's got, this is what we should do. And it's amazing. Everybody with an answer also has a political ideology that they're trying to push at the same time. I always find that funny. But I'm going to be honest with you. There's only one problem, and there's only one answer. And the problem is sin in the hearts of individuals, of people, and it just comes out in weird ways. It comes out in everybody's life, some people more catastrophic than others. And there's only one answer, and that's Jesus. That's it. And we can pass all the laws we want, and great, sin will find a way around it. It's been doing it for thousands of years. We can create all the programs we want that train people to be smarter, and all you'll do is make sin smarter in the way that it deals with stuff. We can protest, and I think we need to protest at times. I think there's times we need to point out, hey, this isn't right. But at some point, we have to realize that protesting is just shining a light on it. It's just kind of an organized complaint session in a way, not in a negative light. I know that doesn't carry a great word, but it's like, hey, this isn't right. At some point, we've got to get past the this isn't right, and we've got to do something about it. That's something we have to do. So we can protest all we want, and sin just takes a breath because it just knows they're wasting some time and they feel like they're really doing something, so they'll waste some energy, and I can just keep going on and doing what I do. We can do all of these things, but we can ignore the issues. We can ignore things, and we can just say it's just part of life. And you know what? Sin will take a breath and just keep on destroying people until we get to the truth that there is one problem, it's sin. There's one answer, it's Jesus. And what's sad is that we have this answer, and we need to give this out. There's only one problem, one answer, and there's only one way to be unshakable in the life storm. Because the truth is, we are in the middle of I know a lot of people. We are in the middle of storms. Our country is in the middle of a storm, and it is both shaken and still shaking. And you can see that in all around us when we see these things. But there's only one way to be unshakable. We learned last week, we talked about the first thing about being unshakable is to have a foundation that is unmistakable. The foundation is built on Jesus, and that means that everything that you do, every decision that you make, the reason that you live, the reason you go to work, the reason you go to school, the things that you do, all that's built on Christ. And you're trying to do things His way. You're trying to do things to honor Him and with the same purpose that He has. That foundation, a foundation that is built on that will not fall. It doesn't matter what kind of house you built. It doesn't matter how good your materials are. It doesn't matter if somebody else has, a better job or whatever. That does not matter. Those things don't matter. And that verse when we talked about that passage of Scripture last week, the only difference between the houses is where they build it and what they put the foundation on. And so many times we come to it, we have a problem with our lives, or we have a storm coming and we're worried about, is this it? We're going to be destroyed, and we get really fearful and all those type of things, and we go right to, what the materials of the house is. Well, if I had a better job. Well, if I had a better spouse. Oh, well, if my kids were better. Oh, well, if my boss would leave me alone. Oh, if my neighbors wouldn't. Oh, if I had a bigger car or a newer car, whatever. We go to all those things, and those things absolutely do not matter as far as whether the house will stand or fall. Paul says that I found the secret of being content in all situations. And be content through Christ who strengthens me. The foundation of Christ. We learned about that's the first step to being unshakable in the storms of your life. But today we want to look at another situation, to another encounter with a storm. Because all of these through this series, we're going to be looking at different storms, because the Bible has used the storm metaphor, analogy, whatever you want to say, has used illustration, used it so well throughout, because there's so many things within a storm, and we talked about those last week that apply from the physical storm to the storms in our lives. And today we're going to look at a story that's told actually in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but we're going to look at Luke's account of when Jesus and the disciples encountered a storm. We're going to look in Matthew 8, 23 through 27. If you've got your smart device, you can hit the Brown Bible app or whatever you have. There's a Brown Bible app by Life Church that you can get. And actually, we put, if you type in Bay West Church, you can pull up my notes and follow along, and you can send yourself notes and stuff like that if you want to type in things that you remember, and you can email them to yourself and stuff like that. It's a great note-taking device. If you are old school and you go with the book, that's no problem. The book is great with me. If you got a scroll and you want to unroll it, I don't care. Just do whatever. Read it. But we're going to have them on the screens right here, and we're going to start in Matthew chapter 8, verse 23. It says, then he, talking about Jesus, got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. And suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Now, here's something interesting. You got to realize the context of what's happening here. Jesus has been preaching to the crowds, and they've kind of drained him. He needed a break. You know, you ever been around a lot of people and you need a break? Well, Jesus has been too. Because this is what was happening here. And so what he's saying is, I want to go get in a boat, and we're going to go to the other side of the lake that we're at, the body of water that we're at. We're going to go across that, and I'll get a break. You know, and so Jesus leads the disciples. They get in the boat, and they head across the sea and across the lake, and you have suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake. Now, you got to understand something about this storm. You know, when the word that's used there for storm is actually the same word that they use in other places for earthquake. When it says furious storm, this was not just a regular storm. This was a big deal storm. When they've used this word in other parts of the Bible, when Jesus used it, he's talking about at the end times when the world, when the world is destroyed. This has been used when people talk about the events that happened around when he was crucified, and we know all these big, huge events that happened there. This is what the type of storm. This is not just a regular, everyday storm. You know, this is something huge. And you can see it, and I love to see what Jesus, in the middle of this superstorm, in the middle of the perfect storm, what's Jesus doing? You know, Jesus said, but Jesus was sleeping. I think it's hilarious. You're in this little boat, because it's not like, this is not a cruise ship they're in. Little boat. He's down at the bottom of the boat, and it is like waves are coming over the top, and it's this huge, incredible seismic event, and here's Jesus sleeping. He's either really, really tired and really, really drained, or he's a really heavy sleeper, or it could be something else. That's extremely important, and it is. This is an extremely important 4 words to what we're talking about this morning. So we're going to continue on, but don't forget that part right there. It's not just important to the narrative. And see, the disciples come to him, in verse 25, it says, the disciples went and woke him, and they said, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Now, a lot of times, I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible and I see the disciples do something that seems to be scary or kind of stupid or something, I just get this picture of disciples like they were all fearful guys, and, you know, they're just little wimps, you know, or something like that. I don't know why, you know, I don't know if you do that. I do, you know, sometimes. But the truth is, what you have to realize is this testifies to the size of the storm. A lot of these guys were professional fishermen. This was not their first rodeo or their first storm. You know, and if they're afraid that they're about to drown, that tells you that, oh no, this is a big deal. This is a huge deal. Then you got some very experienced guys who spend a lot of time in the sea, and now they're afraid that they're going to die. This is the size of the superstorm that is here. And Jesus is sleeping, and they go wake him up. And he replies to them, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. You gotta love that Jesus. Like, okay, I can see him wake up, you know. Why are you guys so afraid? Oh my goodness. Stop it. You know, I flipped on a light, or you ever flipped on a light? I was talking to Katie about this. It's like he flipped on a light. Lights on, lights off. He goes, what are you guys so worried about? You're afraid of the dark? Okay. Lights on. Everything was still, just like that. You know, and you've got to really grasp the size. I mean, because this was more Maria than it was light afternoon rain. And then it's just like water, a lot of waves, everything. Stop it. Here's the thing about that word rebuke that they use there. That word is the same word that they use when they talk about when Jesus casts out a demon. Realize that? He rebuked the demon. He rebuked the winds and the waves. What it shows us is there's a spiritual side to this as well. There's something that we need to know about this storm from a spiritual aspect. You know, and what you see, they say the men in verse 27, they said, the men were amazed, and they said, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. Now, what you have to understand in Jewish and Christian history, these miracles over the natural environment type thing, these storms, you don't see these all the time. These were more rare. So what you're seeing when they say, what kind of man is this? This is one of the first times that they're really cluing in, hey, this isn't just a man. You know, a lot of people read this story and they talk about the storms in their lives and stuff like that. And yes, this has some really important things about the storms in our lives. But one of the biggest things about this story was this is one of those where people started to clue in that Jesus is bigger than this world. Even the winds and the waves obey him. It's very Christological in nature, if you want a big word. There you go. Here's a few things that we need to know about the storm. Big deal, okay? One of the first things you need to know about storms is when you follow Christ, storms are in your future. When you follow Christ, storms are in your future. In John 16:33, Jesus tells us that in this world we will have trouble. Okay? A lot of times people think, I come to church, okay, and I start to follow Christ, then everything gets rosy and it gets to be rainbows and lollipops and my life is all okay. That's false. And if anybody tells you that, you need to direct them back to the Bible. Because then you should go read all the way through, and see what's happened. When David is got 300 guys and an army of thousands is chasing him around because he loves God. You've got that. When you go back and you look at Job, who was rich and powerful and had all these things and found out that being rich and powerful really gives you this. It's something that can be taken away because all of it got taken away. His grandchildren, his children, his houses, everything he had got taken away. And he's following Jesus. You look at these disciples. I want you to get this. Don't miss this part. Jesus, being tired, decided to take his disciples and lead them into a superstorm, a once-in-a-lifetime type of storm, for rest. He led them there. They followed him. They got in the boat. They got out in the storm. And the storm started happening. It's not because Jesus didn't know it was going to happen. Think about that. Just because we follow Jesus does not mean that we will not have storms in our life. Here, the armor of God that talks about in Ephesians 6, Paul writes about that. You should go read that one time, the breastplate of righteousness, all these things, the belt of, Read all of that. There's one thing you won't find in the middle of that. You won't find a back plate. Somebody told me one time it's because God doesn't have you run from trouble. A lot of times you head right into it. Because see, here's the thing. Following Jesus doesn't make you storm-less. It makes you storm-proof. There's a great song I heard one time, and it was real. I say great. I mean, it's like this. It's a contemporary song a few years ago, and it's not like the most life-changing song forever, but it has a great line in it that I hang on to sometimes. It says, sometimes, what we're talking about, it's talking about being in the middle of the storm. It says sometimes in the middle, it says sometimes he calms a storm. Sometimes he calms his child. There's no guarantee that if you follow Christ, that you're not going to have issues at work, that you're not going to have financial problems, that something's not going to happen to you health-wise. That just when you think you've got everything together, that something's not going to change and there's a fly going to fly into the ointment. And all of a sudden you've got to adapt to that. What do I do with this situation? God, I thought you loved me, but here's this. God does love you. God still loves you. Jesus is the same Jesus that he was when they were walking up to the boat as when he was in the middle of the storm. What changed? It was the disciples actually in their faith. I'm going to tell you something else. When you follow Jesus, it does not lessen the size of your storms. A lot of times the storm that Jesus and the disciples, these are the good guys, by the way, that was not a normal storm. I've said this, it was a complicated seismic event. It was a big deal. I would venture to say that it's very possible that they never ran into another storm that was that size on the sea. That's very possible. This was a big, big deal. This could have been the storm that they tell their kids about 20 years from now, the grandkids. And you got Pappy Peter sitting there on the old rocking chair. I tell you what, one time, boys and girls, when I was, and Jesus, the prettiest thing, and I've never seen anything like it. And Jesus walks up and goes, no, and it stops. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The storms were not less because you follow Jesus. And a lot of times, sometimes the storms are greater. They're greater. And so you got to, and this is what Jesus told them to say. That just perplexes me. Okay, I'm tired. I'm drained. What do you do when you're tired or drained? You want to like turn on some like light jazz or something? Like, I don't know, go get a massage or hang out on the beach or, just everybody leave me alone. I want to de-stress. Jesus is like, okay, I'm just going to go hop in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime storm. I think that'll be fine. I'll get a little sleep, Think about that in your life. What's the hardest thing to do when there's a big storm going on in your life? When your kids are going off the rail? When your cousin is angry with you? When your job is being threatened? When you just got the repair and you don't know where it's going to come from? When there's a storm coming, literally, that's going to do something. When you can't get to your parents or to your family and you don't know what's going on, what do? You freak out a lot of times. That's what we do. We freak out and we can't, what? Sleep. Very important. Jesus is making a statement to you and I and to everyone who ever hears this story. He says, look, when you follow me, I can lead you into the biggest storm that you've ever been, and I'm going to teach you how to sleep in the middle of that. Because it's not about making you storm less. Jesus demonstrated something that we need to understand. The size of any storm pales in comparison to the size of the God that we choose to follow. Jesus said back in the verse where we talked about in John 16:33, he said, in this world we're going to have trouble. He says, I give you my peace. I'm going to give you my peace. He said, I'm telling you all this stuff that is going to be really bad. He's telling the disciples, it's going to get really bad. But I'm telling you this so you can have peace because I've already overcome the world. I have overcome the world. This is okay. I can take care of this when you're following me. And there's no bigger picture, I think, of peace than sleep. And Jesus is demonstrating peace in the middle of this. You guys hear me talk about Proverbs 9:10 that I taught Braden when he was a kid. And if you haven't heard about that, you'll probably hear it before because I come back to this, not because it's the only verse I know, but I think it is a seminal verse. It's a seminal life verse for all of us. It says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. In other words, when you put God, fear, in the right priority of your life, fear of the Lord, when God's in the right priority, not just scared of him, but he's the one you take care of first. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You don't even know what to do. You can't even begin to know what to do in your life until you put God in the first priority of your life. That's when you understand the what, okay? Because you look at God's word and he says, do this, and you don't, I don't understand why you tell me to do this. Sometimes I look at God's word and he tells me to do something and I go, I just don't get it. I don't understand why I need to do that. You're telling me I need to do that. Okay, since you're the top priority, even though I think that's nuts, I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to praise you in the middle of it, and just whatever comes is whatever comes. Fear the Lord, beginning of wisdom, and as you experience what happens in the middle of that, knowledge of the Holy One, what becomes next? Understanding. After you put him in the right priority, then you do what he says first, and you demonstrate it. As you get experience in that situation, then you get understanding. Understanding is the why you were supposed to do it to begin with. So much of what God says doesn't make sense in this world because this world is affected by sin, and this world goes backwards to what God says to do. That's what sin, nature, inside of us tries to do. Create conflict with God, and we go different from what he says to do. But when we follow him and when we work in the way that he says, it may not be immediate, it may not be in the next 10 minutes, it might be 10 years before you look back at that path and you go, oh my goodness, because I followed you here, here, and here, oh, this, and this happened, or this happened, and that wouldn't have happened. Oh, I had no idea, but you knew all along. And sometimes God takes big storms to play that out for you, to make a statement to you that I really do know what I'm talking about when he talks to you about that. The same writer who wrote Proverbs 9:10 also wrote earlier in that book, it was Solomon or Koheleth or whatever you want to call it right there, whatever name you want to use. But he wrote this, and I think wrote these words in Proverbs 3, which I think are awesome. It says, my son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. See, fear the Lord, beginning of wisdom. Put God in the first priority, beginning of wisdom, and understanding, trusting him daily, and the experiences that you've had. You do not need to let go of the experiences that you've had in a storm where God has been faithful. Do not let go of that. You're going to need it. Don't let it get out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace, around your neck. You will wear those things. Do you get that? You will wear these situations, these things, the what and the why, and the times that God has proven what he is. You will wear them like an ornament of grace around your neck. You will tattoo them on your forehead. They will become something you want to tell everybody about. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. Verse 24, I love these. It says, and when you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Just like Jesus sleeping in a boat with a catastrophic storm going on. Verse 25, it says, have no fear of sudden disaster, or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked, for the Lord will be at your side and will keep your foot from being snared. It's beautiful. We think those words are great, but when we get in the middle of the storm, we have to remind ourselves of those things. Jesus was demonstrating in this moment, in this story, that there is no need for fear of the world when you are following the Lord. What's the once-in-a-lifetime storm you're in right now? Think about it. Maybe that you were in at one time. Maybe that you're still trying to get over, that still affects the decisions that you make today because you were in a storm back then. This is coming. This is what is coming that you don't see. What's coming, maybe a storm that's coming that you don't see. Just here's what you need to understand something about Jesus, and this is something from the disciples' perspective, okay? They're in the middle of this once-in-a-lifetime storm. Maybe you're there, all right? Just because Jesus was silent doesn't mean that he's ignorant of your situation. Jesus was asleep. They were freaking out. They had to go get him. Just because he's silent doesn't mean that he's ignorant of the storm. Just because he's silent does not mean he's apathetic to the storm. You may be in the middle of something right now and you're going, okay, for Pete's sake, show up, God, all right? If you say you are who you say you are, it's time to show up. And you may feel or trick yourself into thinking that God does not love you or that God does not care. And those are all foolish notions, because when it's all lollipops and rainbows, God loves you. And when it's not going well, he still loves you. And you have to remind yourself of that. There's no greater model of peace, I think, than Jesus sleeping in the middle of a storm. And that is our example. Now, how do we do this? The other thing is this. When you follow Jesus, you follow the one who controls the storms. That's what you have to remember. Even as bad as things may be, as tough as things might look, you still follow the one who controls the storm. Every storm, and here's the thing, every storm in your life is more about the spiritual decisions that you make in the midst of that storm than they are about the physical results that happen from that storm. You losing your job has more to do with how you react and honor God in the process of losing your job than losing your job ever will. If you follow Christ, he said, look, I'm going to take care of you. See all the stuff where he says, ye of little faith? He said to the disciples, when he says little faith? It's when they think he's too little. It's not really about their small faith. He says it in Matthew 6 when he talks about, when people need, what am I going to wear? What am I going to do? He said, don't worry about that. Don't be so of little faith. That's when he brings up the term little faith. With things like that, that's where he brings those things up when he talks about little faith. And you got to love Jesus right here, because when they came to him, this is what you read this at if you're not careful, because our culture would see what Jesus said as a shutdown moment, like, where you give somebody a snap and shake your head or whatever, I don't know, and you just tell them off and they get real quiet. It's a shutdown comment. But that's not what Jesus did. He said, you of little faith, why are you afraid? He was not shutting them down. He was engaging them to consider, why are you afraid right now? Because they need to understand this is why. They were afraid because it doesn't matter that you've got little faith, really. Jesus already told us, if you've got faith as small as a mustard seed, which we know is the smallest seed that they knew at the time, is as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. You say, this mountain, get up, go in the sea. It's not about the limit, the size of your faith. The little faith that we talk about in these areas is when the disciples were saying, hey, my faith is in something that is too little to handle this situation. And Jesus always pushed back against that because it's not true. He's larger than anything. He controls all the storms and situations of your life. And I love it because it's not that Jesus was saying, hey, he never said, hey, go away. Why did you wake me up? Gosh, you're so stupid. No. He engaged them. We always have access to him. Basically, any time that you think or that they thought that they wouldn't have what they needed to accomplish, what God was putting before them, that's when he brought up the little faith thing. Because here's what happens. The problem was that in their fear, they began to reduce the size of what they thought God was. And that's our problem too. I remember when I was little, that we would go to Blue Springs State Park, and it had like a big pool, and they had a high dive that was like 12 feet up in the air, and I thought it was huge. Of course, Randy would probably, Frank's son Randy's a diver, so he'd probably laugh at me if I told him the story. I was scared to death of that to dive off that. I don't do well with heights and stuff. And I remember being a kid, and I remember getting up, I'm going to do it. And I just walked up, I walked up to the thing, I got in line, and there's a whole line, because back then we didn't have a whole lot to do, so that was like the big deal. And so I climbed up the ladder, I get on the top, and I start shaking by the time I get to the end, and I'm going to date myself really bad, but I look over the edge at the end, and all I can see, anybody ever remember that movie Orca? It's about a killer whale that is like killing people, and they had this one scene where Orca just like comes out of the water right at the camera, and all you see is his mouth, and I look over the edge, and I swear I saw Orca coming out of the water at me, and there was this moment of realization, and I went, what in the world am I doing? Am I insane? That's water down there. It'll probably kill me. I'm at a pool every day. So I remember backing myself down and the humble climb down of shame where you ask people to move, where you could climb back down. And I walked out that moment of realization. We all have those moments of realization in the middle of things. You're in the middle of something and all of a sudden it occurs to you, what in the world am I doing? Here's the tough thing, and those are valuable at times. But here's the tough thing about that. When fear causes you to realize, you think you're realizing, you're really starting to grasp this situation. What in the world am I doing? No, you're not. Fear is causing you to forget what kind of God it is that you follow. Because fear makes you forget. Fear is the opposite of faith. And without faith, without trusting God to do what he said he will do, without him proving it to us first, with just trusting him, before that we can't please God. This fear causes you to forget the God that you follow. And we think fear doesn't make you realize. I want you to remember this. It makes you forget. It makes you forget how powerful God is. It makes you forget that he cares for you. It makes you forget the million times that he's already carried you through. The promises that are available to you. Now, if you're in a storm today, as we talked about last week, if you haven't put your foundation on Christ, it's going to fall down at some point. Okay, I can't help you with that. That's the first place to start. So that's the point where you start to follow Christ and you base your life on him, and you base your priorities on him, and what is important to you is what is important to him. And if it's not important to him, it's not going to be important to you. And you make those decisions for all those areas of your life. And they affect every part of your life. They're not just part of it over here. Not just, I'm going to have my career to myself or my hobby to myself, and then Jesus can take care of everything else. No. Everything. You start there. But the second thing that you need to understand is you start learning to trust the things that he says in the middle of the storms. You start to realize that just because I'm trusting him, it doesn't mean that something bad is not going to happen. It also does, what it means is if something bad happens, I can have all that I need to handle that situation and to make it through to the other side and honor God the whole way through and praise him and show my reaction to him and to everyone else and be faithful to God in the middle of that. That's what that entails. That's what that means. And that, I think, is the hardest thing to remember when the wind is howling and the waves are high. is that the same God that led me to this point is the same God who will lead me to and will give me a story that I can set in a rocking chair on a porch someday and tell my grandchildren that this is what my God led me through. Your storms don't disappear. They just become valuable when you follow Christ. Because you know you can make it through. And that's the second area to becoming unshakable.
Thanks for being a part of Bay West today. Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. Please feel free to check us out at baywestchurch.org, or you can follow us on Facebook at Bay West Church.